You are listening to the Hammersley Brothers e-commerce podcast. Like what you hear and want to take the shortcut on your e-commerce growth? Join hundreds of brands that work with us and head over to joinhb.com. That's joinhb.com and see how we can help you further. Join our members and smash your targets and unlock the profits within your e-commerce site. Hello, Ian. How are you? Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Mark. How are you?
Right. Yeah. Another
You're smiling
Tuesday morning. Yeah, I just smashed my desk.
You're smiling because you've got a desk that goes up and goes down with the button, and you're telling me that you pressed up when I think you pressed down because it kept on going up and it smashed your light on the ceiling.
It smashed the light on the ceiling, and the light just fired itself at me whilst I was having my cup of tea. And I was just saying, doing these podcasts, it's probably one of the most dangerous jobs you could actually have in the world. I know Alex Honnold is like climbing Taipei and stuff like that, but this would scare him.
He would not have.
That light at any second could come.
He called it.
He would. He'd have gone, it's not the right day. Not the right day for the podcast.
It's too wet.
It's too hardcore. Yeah. But, we put ourselves in danger for our listeners. Every week we're here just living dangerously. Yeah. Anyway, what I thought we'd do today is, actually, I can't even read the screen because it's got T all over it. But let me just bring it over there.
Well, I don't think you need to. I think we can remember what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. But basically, we're going to be doing a 5 parts. You do. Whilst I clean the tea off my screen.
Clean the tea off your screen. Yeah. So it's a 5-part series into probably the number one question people ask us when they meet us, or it's the number one question that people are obsessed with, and it is, why aren't my ads working? I'm running an e-commerce business and my ads aren't working and I can't scale my ads. So another variation of that question is, I can't scale my ads, or I don't have confidence in my ads, or I just feel like if I could get my ads working better, then I'd be able to scale. And it's really, really, really common, that question. And that's what we're going to unpack in a 5-part series. And we'll give a summary today, and then we're going to go through each one of the 5 reasons that we come across, the 5 different scenarios of why your ads might not be working. And most interestingly is that the majority of reasons that we're going to go through are not to do with your ads. And I think we are deliberately being, I think it's like 80% of the time. I think you said it the other week. I think you said 80% of the time the ads are fine. 20% of the time it is the ads, and 80% of the time it's nothing to do with the ads. So that's what we're going to go and unpack. Do you want to add any intro summary before we go into?
Yeah, I think there's so much focus on ad types, and there's a belief that if I only had the killer ad, then my whole business would be miraculously changed. And whilst there are businesses that have certainly scaled through very good ads, and we do talk about in the podcast, we do talk about good ads, good management strategies, Google ads and all that kind of stuff, and Facebook ads and things like that. And it does make a difference. Like, you don't really want to be running a business where in order to survive, you have to always have the best ad. Like, that is not, because someone's always going to come up with a slightly better ad than you, or if the edge is based on the ad working amazingly well, it's just always going to be really difficult. It's always going to be really difficult. And also, it's going to be very difficult to sell that business. If you are like an amazing meta ads person and you're really, really good at it, and then someone comes look at the business and go, well, there's no way I could do ads like this. How are you going to sell that business? Because it's completely dependent on you being amazing at ads. So you have no exit. So you really want to bolster the other reasons why the business is a great business. And so we're going to talk about in this 5 series the there's to be honest, there's a couple of those. There's a couple of those about ads, but it's mostly about other stuff. So if you've been agency hopping and expecting this new, shiny, bright, young agency to fix everything, then listen, because we're going to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And we're going to go into all the things we normally see that have actually made a difference.
And on that point, I'll just tell you a little story, which is one of our stories from one of our brands. You put it into context. Somebody might resonate. So, so as you know, we have a couple of e-commerce businesses, and one of them is the bedding brand. We did well. We did like $1 million in November, just gone, and we launched a business a couple of years ago. So it was scaling quite nicely. The reason why we started that business was on a conversation with a customer on our coaching program, on our mentoring program on level 2, who knocked on my door one day in Manchester, and he said, "Oh, I've got this e-commerce business, and I've gone through 5 agencies, and I want to see if your program's going to work, for me." And I went, right, it's gone through 5. He said, none of these agencies have worked. These 5 agencies, none of them have worked. And I said, right, hang on a minute. Right, tell me about the business. And he talked about the business. I said, no, I'm not interested in you talking about, I want them to know the maths. And he told me that his average order value was £20. His margin was 20%, and they bought once. And I then said, that doesn't sound like a very good business. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, because the numbers are wrong, the maths are wrong. The business is inherently flawed, and it was very competitive at that. So, I said, there's nothing wrong with the agencies. There's something wrong with your business. And he said, well, what kind of business does it need? And I said, well, something like it has a higher average order value of like maybe $100, something that has a margin of like 50, 60%, and something they buy, a couple of times, every few years. So maybe they buy like 1.5 times a year on average. And he went, oh, okay, what like? And then, well, bedding, something like bedding, margins about 65%, average order value is about $100, $150, and they buy, 1.5 times a year. And that's how we started. Because he said, okay, let's do it then. And that's how we started the bedding. So it came on the back of this very conversation that we were trying to architect the maths of a business so that we could go out into the market and make our ads work. And that's exactly what's happened. We've architected the business to be able to push aggressively in the ads. And we did $1 million in November, and we spent about $190,000, didn't we?
So
on ads.
Just before you go
profitable.
ahead, should we we'll do the 5 things we're going to do in the next podcast, and then should we talk a little bit about the first one today? Because that's kind of what you were just talking about.
Do you want to? Yeah. Do you want to read the 5?
I'll talk through them. So the 5 podcasts we're going to do which is Ian covered a little bit then, was like, it's not your ads, it's your margin, it's your model. So that's the first one. Second one is the second podcast is going to be your landing page suck, which is mostly the beginning of the dominoes, 6 dominoes that we go through. And then the third one is your ads are boring, which is more about, not necessarily about the setup of the account, it's more about the reach of your account, which is important. And we'll talk about that in a lot more detail on that podcast. And the fourth one is your follow-up game. So, if you listen to the podcast for a while, you've probably heard us talk about data capture rate and email follow-up as being important. So we're going to dive into that one in our podcast. And then the fifth one is about the AI models that are being built in AI and how people freak out too often and mess up the learning stages and not understand what they're doing, and they just keep pushing themselves into the crap. So yeah, those are the 5 things we're going to cover in the podcast. Yeah. And obviously, if you're listening to this on YouTube, if you are up front and alongside us, please put some comments in there, ask us some questions. and we'll tailor the rest of the podcast to those comments that we get. It'd be interesting to get your feedback on why you think your ads aren't working and why you're not scaling, or to help everybody else, what you did to actually get yourself out of thing and what actually fixed it. So so the first one, Ian, you were talking about like how we look at the model.
Yeah. Well, the first one, there's so many. You say this out. You say yourself to a question. You say your question out loud. And why aren't my ads scaling? There's so much depth to that question that we know because we've been sat here for so many years looking at so many different types of ads. First one I'd ask is, why do you think the ads are not scaling? The first one is, what's your margin and what's your lifetime customer value? Are you pushing enough? And that's the first question is, because Dave in the next e-commerce business he's getting a ROAS of 11, and I can't get a ROAS of 11. I can only get a ROAS of 8. ROAS is return on ad spend. So that's like for every $1 you spend, Dave's getting $11 back, and and I'm only getting $8 back. But he might be in a completely different industry, completely different margins, completely different competitive landscape. And what you need to know is, well, what should my ROAS be in what is a relative comparative industry for my ROAS? And that's the first question. And if you go, well, based on my margin and my lifetime customer value, and leaving enough profit in the business, I should be operating on an overall ROAS of 5. I'm talking out loud. Let's hypothetically say it is. So, and you might be getting a ROAS of 8. And that's the first thing is, well, what ROAS should I be aiming for? And then I think the second one is, and I don't know if you're going to talk a bit about this, but the second one is, in terms of the margin, is if you sort of take a step back, your ads aren't scaling either because of the ads, and there's something wrong with that, or the maths coming out of them aren't good enough. The revenue per visitor isn't there.
Well, let's dive into that. Let's dive into that, because when someone says my ads aren't scaling, what they sometimes mean is that they've historically been sitting in the account at the beginning of 6 ROAS, and they try and scale the ads, and it goes down to a 4, and then they go, oh, that's not. I don't want to get that. Let that all. But what they don't do is they don't look at the actual financial model of the business and go, well, how much did that spend actually affect things? How much are we affording a customer for? What's actually happened, and to understand what actually we can recruit a customer for and work out. Because there's a lot of people who equate an ad spend as a cost, and it is a cost, but the ad spend is, and we've talked about this before, it's like sometimes having a football team of amazing players and not putting a goalie in the goal, and they're saying, well, I'm just going to reduce the cost of the goalie. I'm just going to put anyone in the goal. And so you can actually have a much lower ROAS in a month, according to the ad stats, but actually make a lot more profit because you're over your fixed costs and you've got to that hockey stick level of profit and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing to understand is, like, when you say my ads aren't scaling, is like, do you understand? Do you really understand the model? Do you really understand what you're trying to achieve? Do you understand how I would scale this business and how I would do it? Or are you acting on a model that it just doesn't make sense if you actually look at it fundamentally, sitting down? Because when someone says something, it needs digging into, doesn't it? It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I think I'm listening to you and just thinking a typical scenario that we would hear is they would say, oh, well, I used to be getting an 8 return on my ads, and now I'm getting a 5 return on my ads. And I think they're expecting it to be a linear. A couple of things on that. The market changes. The competitive landscape can change. People can come in and out of your market, and it can massively affect your ROAS, and your cost per click can go up. It is an auction. At the end of the day, your Google ads and your Meta ads, it is an auction. And so, that you're not, if you're comparing last year or the year before, and this year, it isn't like you're comparing a completely different market. It's like going and putting a shop in the Trafford Centre, versus putting a shop, in a local town that has, no competitiveness around it. It's like, of course, it's going to change the metrics of the business. But I think, the other people are often expecting it to be like a linear growth. If I double my ad spend, my sales are going to double, and it doesn't. It had, like you say, it has a tailing off effect. It has that sort of S curve, but if you look at it as an overall contribution at the end of the month, have you made more money or have you made less money? So is your profit higher? Because your percentage profit might be smaller. So just put it as, an example for, many of our own businesses that we're working with, people who've really scaled, they might have a profit at the start of, let's say it might be 30%, but it might be 30% of $100,000, or you could have a 20% of $500,000. And, what would you take? What's a bigger overall contribution? And so that's a sort of scenario where you're looking for, we're looking for the overall profit or the contribution into the business. And if we're hitting the magic sweet spot of 10 EBIT, we want the fastest possible way to get there. So it isn't linear, and it isn't like I will double my ad spend and I will double my sales. It doesn't work like that. I don't think it's ever worked like that. But I think the biggest unlock, I think we're trying to say at this overall stage is that you cannot go to Google or Meta, and let's just keep it simple, Google or Meta, and we can say TikTok and stuff as well. You can't go to Google and Meta and say, I want to operate and grow at a ROAS of 8. Right. You can't do that. You have to go to Google and Meta and say, I want to play in this sector. I'm a clothing brand, or I'm a homeware brand, or I'm whatever pet food brand. And you say, what is the ROAS that you will allow me to recruit new customers at? And then you've got to go away and go, right, how do I make that ROAS work? What does my margin need to be? What does my lifetime customer value need to be? What does my average order value need to be? And that's how you win, by reverse engineering it, rather than just trying to continue to bash against Google and try and change. They're not. Google and Meta do not give a crap about your business. They don't care about you, because there is thousands of you behind you knocking on the door saying, hey, Facebook, Google, can you take our money? And that is the brutal reality. So you've got to really work hard to keep Meta and Google interested in your business. That's it. They don't care about you.
Yeah. And I think, we come back from a background of retail, and those people who don't know, we grew up in a bakery shop. And so the equivalent of it is, let's say you've had a shop and you're selling widgets, and you've been on the high street of a small town. And then you say, I'm going to go and expand. I'm going to go into the big mall. I'm going to go into the Trafford Centre selling my widgets. And you then go into Trafford Centre, which is a big mall in Manchester that I haven't been to for a very long time, but it's different. And so you're getting loads of people walking past. But if you don't adapt your shop that you have from a small town and to adapt to the Trafford Centre to make that work, it's not going to work. You have to adapt to the traffic that you're getting. You have to adapt to the environment that you're in. So if you want to expand, you have to make it work. So it reminds me of Dad when he had the shop, the main shop, and it was a place called Cheadle. And then he expanded to a shop in Stone, and then he expanded to another shop, which was actually inside a supermarket. And if he had done exactly the same playbook that he'd done in the first shop for the other shops, they wouldn't have survived. He had to start working out in stone that, okay, it's much more of a lunchtime trade. It's much more about selling things that people eat for lunch and changing the products in that to make it work. The same thing for the one in the supermarket. It's not about lunch trade. In this one, it's all about having that special loaf that they can't get, the fresh stuff that they can't get during the shop. And so it adapts to the market. It adapts to the traffic that's there. And so as you expand your paid traffic, you're effectively turning your shop from a corner shop to a high street to a mall to Oxford Street. And as you expand, you have to sell slightly different products. You have to sell slightly different mixes of the different products that you've got. You have to push the high margin ones that work. You have to push the other ones left. You have to work to the environment that you're in. You can't just take that corner shop and scale it to Oxford Street.
Yeah, I think just put it to e-commerce speak. There's a business. There's a really good company on the program we've been working with for 3 years now, and when we first met them, they were doing about $1 million. They were a UK business selling it's a beauty product. It's a kind of cosmetic product, and they were doing about £1 million, which is like $1.5 million, something like that, depending on the exchange rate. That's probably quite advantageous, but they were stuck. And, they couldn't spend any more on ads, and they needed to scale. Now, we didn't change anything about their ads. Okay, so that business 2 years ago was doing £1 million a year. Now they're doing 30 million 2 years later. They've gone from 1 million to 30 million in 2 years. And it was nothing to do with their ads. It was nothing to do with their ads at all. It was fundamentally that their product, it was a £35 product, so a $40 price, great margin, 80%, but they bought it once because it didn't run out. It was like a serum, it was like drops that you put. It didn't run out. So what we needed was to engineer the products to have better repeat. So they came up with a different type of product that was a very similar product, but in a different pattern. It was for a different part of the body, hair and shampoo. It was shampoo and hair, and that consequently changed the maths completely. And it went and the average order value went up, and the repeat went up. The lifetime customer value went up, and it meant that they could then operate at a much, much lower ROAS. And the market was so much bigger because people bought much more frequently. And that's how that business went from 1 million to 30 million in 2 years, was because we changed the business model. And so that's the overall takeaway. Initially is that the ads are really the icing on the cake, and they are there. And you can drive those very hard and very aggressively if you've got a business underneath that can, support it, and it's architected. But I'll say is, we are not saying, because I think there are scenarios where the ads and the structure and the ads and you're advertising in the wrong place. You're advertising in Google and you shouldn't be advertising in Google, or you're spending too much money in Meta and you shouldn't be, or you're spending too much at the wrong time of year. There are lots of scenarios where the ads are not being managed properly, or you're spending in the wrong areas, or you're overcomplicating it, or there's something wrong with the creative, or your Google strategy is wrong. There are loads of scenarios where that is the case, but Mark and I would, I mean, it sounds grandiose here, but we'd be able to tell you very quickly if there was something wrong with the structure of your ads, and we'd be able to teach you exactly what the structure should be, and whether or not you should be spending more or less on Facebook, more on certain times of year, and whether or not you've got the right brand bidding exclusions for Google. All of those things. I mean, it's your bag, Mark. You've built the whole Zero to Hero Facebook group. You've built the whole Google Ads strategy for all of the people on the program who are using it that business, to scale to 30
well,
million.
you would check the ads first, because it's like, if it is an ads problem, it's much easier to fix than, like, we were talking about coming up with a new product, or like, I think you shouldn't always think that we're telling you to come up with a new product, because we're not. We a lot of the time what we're doing is called category engineering. So we're actually looking at the categories that we have, we're looking at the margin we have on the categories, and we're looking at how we can engineer those categories to work with the new level of traffic that we need to get to the next level. And often we'll have something already in place that we might need to augment, or we might not be pushing the right type of products. So as a recruitment product, we might be trying to recruit on something that just doesn't work as a recruitment product. And so really it's about, I think that analogy where, like, Dad had the stone shop and he had to adapt the whole, they're still selling the same cakes, they're still selling the same bread, pies and everything like that. He's just moving the shop around to be a lunchtime trade instead of like a kind of going by a bread trade. And that's what you have to do as you get into different places, because you are going to get in front of different types of traffic. If you're spending $100 a day compared to spending $10,000 a day, the traffic is going to be very different, because $100 a day, Facebook or Google are going to go after like the low hanging fruit for you, the people that know exactly, like they know a little bit about you, all those sort of stuff. Like when you get up to like $10,000 a day, you have to be able to quickly, sell them exactly what they need. You have to show them in the right place, and you have to do a lot of different things, and they're going to be very different people than when you had that small amount of traffic.
Well, I think take our bedding, just to give you another example, take our bedding brand that we did. We said this a few times that we did $1 million in the November that's just gone, but we didn't. We as a business, we didn't talk about it. We didn't need to talk about it. We knew what we were doing. There was a system. The method was there. I mean, fundamentally, once you'd got the structure right for Google Ads and Meta Ads, it was straightforward. Really, you knew when you could push. You knew when you couldn't push, and as a consequence, it was. It wasn't a. I've lost you. You literally disappeared, haven't you? What's the matter?
It was just someone's got their Facebook ads account back, and I was like, someone got hacked who's big, and they got it back.
Remember, we're live on YouTube now.
I know.
It's like, when you chat to someone and it's just looking the other way.
Well, we're in the thick of it, Ian. Like, we're not TV presenters that have no concept with reality. We're in the middle of it,
Good. I'm glad. I know who you're talking about. I'm happy that that's happened. Yeah. So we essentially, with Bedding Envy, I was hoping you would back me up. So and that's a really profound
no idea
point.
what you were talking about.
The bedding brand. No, you got no idea what I'm talking about. With the bedding brand, we did $1 million in a month, but it was fundamentally the same structure that when we were doing 100,000 in a month, to do $1 million a month, it wasn't like oh my God, this is a totally different structure of the account. It was the same, and the reason why we did $1 million was because we could spend more when we could, because we knew what we needed to spend, and we knew we could ramp it up. And actually, the reason we could spend more was because we got the average order value up, didn't we? So at the start of the year, we went, we can't spend any more because the average order value isn't high enough. It was like $130, and we got it up to $190, and that meant that we could spend a lot more. And that's how
it is insane. Actually, the average order value on that business has gone from like £50 when we first started to like £200.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that when you started.
No,
but it is interesting to see. I think that the bedding envy one is an interesting one in terms of category engineering, because it's actually simplification. Like, as we've got bigger, we've become much more simple. We've actually focused down on the products that sell the best sellers, and we just stock those. Whereas before we had a mess, and I've seen that a couple of times with businesses. There was that lady in Manchester that sold hair extensions, and she used to sell all sorts of stuff, and she just focused down on a few products and scaled really well. And so, that's kind of like an analogy. As you go into the mall, you basically simplify the products down to the ones that people really need. You get rid of the dead weight, and you can, the business is much more nimble. And it can scale much more faster. So it's, like, if you, like, take it back to that example, like she couldn't do free shipping on everything because she sold dresses and she had sold all the stuff. But as soon as she just started selling hair extensions, she's like, I'm going to do free shipping because they're easy to post.
And the people around her at the time were like, "What are you doing? You're taking away, your categories. This is what you need to do." And she's like, "No," and she's very strong with that, and she made the right decision because that business then scaled really rapidly because she had a good product. She bought deep. She had less SKUs, more depth, didn't run out of stock. Understood, how to pack, and invested in packaging and product. And
yeah, so it was a very different business than
UGC.
when she was a corner shop business than when she was at a big mall business. Very, very different. And things you have to do to survive as a corner shop is very different when you have to survive as a higher, high value, high traffic, high volume, volume business. And you can be different shops at different times. That's fine, but you have to realize sometimes the decisions you have to make to jump to the next level. And
so, can I just say, go back to the question, because having said that, we're saying, look, 80% of the time, it's it's a business mathematical question of why your ads aren't scaling, not the ads itself. But having said that, I don't think that you and the team of any, because when people join the program, we do an audit of their ads. We do a full audit, the Google ad and the Meta ads. I think you've always found efficiency improvements. I don't think you've ever had nothing to say. Sometimes, sometimes there's significant
there's always something I've got to say about the ads. Yeah, there's always some things I will find in the ads.
What are those things then?
That said, I might say, don't fix this now because I want you to go and fix this other thing that's more important. Because, I don't want to give them hundreds of things to do because it's like that's what a bad consultant does. A bad consultant will just go, "Yep, all these things are wrong." Blah, blah, blah. You basically got to go, "Oh, actually, in the simplest way to get to where you want to get to, just go and do this, this, and this." It's like, it's not about, it's all very well to point out what's wrong. It's very different to fix it. And so if you want to fix it, you've got to be able to focus on things. I mean, God knows what people, if I got an agency to come and audit the Facebook account and the Google Ads account for Betting Envy, they'd have a field day. But because we're focusing on other things to scale, I will go and do the things in those accounts when it's the right time to do them.
Yeah, I think it's like in the old days you'd have businesses who would do newspaper advertising. They would do off the page ad or inserts. So they'd put leaflets and and they'd take half a page, or a page of a newspaper or magazine, and they would do an ad. And looking at that ad, you'd go, well, okay, I would have maybe laid it out differently, or maybe I'd have made that text bold, or to make that put the the call to action bigger. And actually, I wouldn't have had the back page; I'd have had the front page. And that literally is the conversation that you're having when you're talking about looking at the ad. Why aren't my ads working? You're looking at message, market, medium. What's the message? What's the audience and what's the medium? Where it is, and it's, but you're not looking at. I mean, what we would really say is leave all that as it is. Just double your advertising, but make the business work so it's so efficient that you can get away with having an ad in a magazine that isn't that good, or because it doesn't matter because the business is so slick, it's so profitable. It's so scalable and it's operating at
let me ask you this.
Good metric.
Do the biggest businesses on the high street in the UK have the best ads? They don't.
No, they just spend. They're just everywhere.
They can do it because the model supports it. Some of them have dreadful ads. Absolutely awful ads. And you see them all the time. You go, that's a terrible ad. I'm seeing it over and over again. And it's because their business model supports them having absolute dross advertising. It's the antithesis of what you actually think. Anyway, I'm going to have to shoot off, Ian, because we've almost gone on for an hour.
Well, I think it's a good summary. Thank you.
It's a good summary. We'll be back next week for the next one, which is your landing page suck. And so we'll be digging into Your landing pages next week, and what we think about them. Anyway, hopefully we're adding value.
Thanks, Mark.
Like and subscribe. You've never said it, Ian. I want you to say it. I want you to look into the camera.
Ridiculous.
I want you to look into the camera and just say, like begging. Oh, dear.
No, I'm not being bullied by my brother.
What I'll do is I'll create an AI version of you, clone your voice, and then like put you like begging for subscribers. All right, guys. See you soon. Okay, bye.
Bye.